So I'm really lucky to be joined today by Genevieve Bailey, who is an award-winning filmmaker with her films and has won over 30 awards, I think, been screened over 50 countries. And the film we're going to talk today about is Happy Sad Man, which is really relevant to this podcast, which is about sharing stories of mental illness. And your film does a fantastic job of that. I don't know why I didn't hear of it before. And I found out about it through my connection with the Satellite Foundation. And I went to the screening at Carlton, and it was, I think I said to you on our pre-meeting for this that I didn't think I would enjoy it, but I really, really did. And the reason why I said that to you is because I think with especially a lot of the kids in the Satellite Foundation who have parents with a serious mental illness, you live with it every day, and the last thing you probably want to do is to go watch a movie or a series about it. But I was completely, but I was really enthralled by the movie. It was very emotional at times, and it's a really, really good watch. And I think it does a fantastic job of creating those conversations, and it's a really good other avenue to reach people, I think, who might not have talked about, let's say, their issues with mental health before. And that's a really good prompt. I think if they see that, they would take action to go and do something about it. So congratulations on doing that. And it's a really fantastic film.
Oh, thank you, Joel. Thank you so much for sharing that. I am a filmmaker who really loves knowing what audiences think of the work that I make. And so thanks for your honesty in sharing that you didn't think you were going to enjoy it, because that's a really good point. Like for a lot of people who are working in a certain area of life or living it, they might not want to go and watch that in cinema. But it was really great to hear that it actually did resonate with you. And yeah, I'm really glad to hear that feedback. So thank you.
You're welcome. But it doesn't really feel like a film about, even though it is about mental illness in a way, it does, to me, when I was watching it, didn't really even feel like that. It's just more about story, learning about these five men. And that was sort of something that was there, but it wasn't the totally, from my perspective, it wasn't like, that's what we're going to focus on and that's it. It was more about the individual stories and journeys. And that was just, that was a part of it, but it wasn't, that was not something that's put in your face the whole time.
Yeah, actually, when I was making the film before it was finished, my brother said to me, don't call it a film about mental health. It's not a film about mental health. Like, my friends aren't going to want to go to the cinema on a Friday night and watch a film about mental health. He said it's a film about friendship, and it's about compassion, and it's about men and manhood and different ideas around what it means to be a man today. And he said it's much more than just a film about mental health. And I think that's right. It's actually a very human story of 5 different people who are sharing their experiences and have trusted me. And it's actually, one of my biggest highlights as a filmmaker is hearing people laugh in the cinema. And there's a lot of humor in Happy Sad Man, as the name suggests. There's also sad moments. But I think it's really uplifting hearing people laugh and release that energy because, I mean, in lots of ways, John, who was the inspiration for the film, talks about how, mental health issues can actually be really funny sometimes, situations he finds himself in, and just to know that, we're all human and we don't have to talk about it in a clinical way all the time.
Absolutely. Now, how did you first get into be a filmmaker? Because everyone, I think, sees, how do you be a director or how do you be a filmmaker? Well, how did you come to be a filmmaker? Obviously, you have Happy Sad Man, which is a really award-winning film, but you had one before it as well, which was at 11, which is won a lot of awards as well, and that sort of put your name on the map, I guess, from reading about it online. So, how did you get into the whole thing?
Yeah, I made a film called I Am 11, which was my first feature-length documentary before Happy Sad Man. And it's about the world today through the eyes of 11-year-old kids. So I traveled. I'd never been outside of Australia, but to make I Am 11, I traveled to 15 countries around the world over a number of years. It was an amazing experience. The film's in 12 languages and the funnest thing we've ever done. But prior to that, I made a lot of short films and music videos. But going back to my childhood, when I was about 8, back in my day, we didn't have video cameras or iPhones, at home. So I would borrow a camera from the primary school I was at just for the weekend and make the most of it. I would have, many, many hours filming my dog or setting up little special effects music videos with my brother and sister, or interviewing pot plants, or whatever I was doing. I was just really making the most of this opportunity to capture things on camera. So my love of storytelling was something that was very evident in my childhood, and then just continued into adulthood. And I feel, I love my job so much, and I'm very privileged to be able to be a conduit for other people's stories.
And how were you able to make a career out of it? Because a lot of people do go to film school. At my job, I actually employ a lot of kids who do the RMIT filmmaking and media and stuff like that. And they work for me in the video team. But How do you go about making a career out of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's not always easy, and it's not the sort of industry where there's a shortage of workers. So there's not a high demand in that way that you can just, you know, apply for a job and start directing films. So you just have to, in my experience, have a huge amount of self-belief. Like, there's so many hurdles that you have to jump over. And for me, I just always dreamed that these ideas I have, it's worth doing, it's possible, and I can make it happen, even if it's not always financially viable. Like, it's definitely not a career I got into to get rich. Maybe there's this idea sometimes that in the film industry or TV, and there's certain areas of film and TV that, you know, there is a lot more money, but doing independent documentaries is really for the love of storytelling and creating impact. And for me, it's encouraging and inspiring more compassion in people, more kind of curiosity as well. And yeah, I guess it's something that I just kind of continued to hone my skills from short films into making feature-length work over a number of years, and I love it very much.
What advice would you have for someone then who wants to be a filmmaker? Is it more just pursue it as a, let's say, as a passion first, and maybe just go out there and try? And is it something where you had to go out and get funding for your first film, or was it something where you had this idea and you go approach people, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, with my short films, I created most of them on just a shoestring budget, and I would get whatever gear I could get access to. So rather than waiting till I had a lot of money or funding or equipment, I just wanted to practice the skills of storytelling, which, you know, nowadays you can do with an iPhone. So I would say for people who are feeling like, oh, I don't have the money to make something big, start small and create something, you know, this weekend on a phone. Because actually the skills in terms of producing and directing or shooting or editing, they can all be developed without needing a huge amount of equipment. And I'd also say that a lot of people maybe think that being a filmmaker is all about directing. But as you would know, there's lots of different skills, and not everyone wants to actually direct. Some people might want to write, or they might want to edit. They might love the idea of bringing a story together in the edit suite, or they might want to produce or record the sound, or, you know, do the music. So I think just kind of broadening what it is to be a filmmaker and realizing there's so many different roles that you might be able to have a passion for beyond just the kind of role of the director.
And what makes a good story to you, or what's sort of like a framework for someone if they want to, all right, cool, I want to get on the weekend, or I want to do something about my own mental health journey in terms of film it or document or whatever? What's a good sort of framework they can work with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, Joel, for me, being really authentic is important. So there's this idea that people should make films about things they know. So if you don't have an experience, well, then you can't make it. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there's an opportunity to learn about things and capture them, even if you don't have an experience with it. But I think, yeah, being authentic, and also just realizing that you can actually do a lot in a really short period of time. So even though my films, my feature-length films, take a long time to make, I used to make a lot of short films just in a weekend and focus on one very specific story I wanted to tell rather than trying to do too much. But I think ultimately, like, thinking of stories that you're going to be proud of sharing with other people. So thinking out what's something important to me, what's a story I want to share, and how can I bring my voice to this project in a unique way that maybe is a little bit different to how someone else would make it.
Sure, that's some great advice there. So now I want to talk about the film. So yeah, how did you arrive at the subject? As you said, John was John the main impetus behind the project, or?
Yeah, so John, I've got a photo of him here. Let's have a look. This is John. And I say in the film, he is at once the happiest and saddest man I've ever known in my life. And he was the initial inspiration for the project and for the title. But as I was making the film, I realized, because John's a good friend of mine, that for a man of his vintage in Australia, we don't often see people like him talking about his emotional life, his mental health, his mental illness, in a way that's just so direct, you know, like so honest, so upfront, so direct. And for me, I didn't grow up with anyone like John in my family. I didn't know anyone like John. So when I met him, I was like, wow, this is unique. I want to get to know this person and capture his story and share it with the world. But then in the process of making Happy Sad Man, I had two other guys. This is Jake and this is David. And they were good friends of mine. And I thought to myself, I feel like they have really interesting stories that they could share in terms of their happiness and sadness and their lives. And then I met Grant and Ivan. This is Grant with the surfboard and Ivan here. And you've seen the film, so you know that these guys are all really different, but what they have in common is that they're great communicators, they're very honest, and they really want to make a difference in terms of reducing stigma and opening up people's minds around talking about mental illness. So yeah, the film kind of came together over a number of years and just kind of kept on building and growing. And my production company is called Proud Mother Pictures, and it's because my films are like my babies, and I kind of, there's a long gestation period, longer than 9 months, and then, you know, I send them off into the world and I hope they have a good life, but they also have their own kind of pulse, and they go out into the world. And, you know, Happy Sad Man's been out for a little while now and people are still discovering it, and I'm so glad that you were able to see it, Joel, and we're continuing to screen it around Australia, so that more people can meet the guys on the screen and also have conversations, do Q&A sessions with us, and talk about how they feel about the film.
I think it's great because, yeah, 4 years ago, it was 2018 you released it, and you've still got regular screenings all the time with people going. And I think that can just keep going for a very long time, especially with the mental health awareness movement now. It's becoming a lot more prevalent. I see this as such a good other avenue to get people engaged and involved rather than the generic stuff that's going around today.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud that my last film, I'm 11, and this one, they have long lives, you know, and I want to make films about things that are relevant to a broad audience, not just to a really narrow audience. And, you know, to your point earlier about how you weren't sure if you were going to like the film, we've actually had a number of guys who have come to screenings and said, I don't even know what I'm turning up to. Someone gave me a ticket, or my partner's told me to turn up, or my sister's here. I don't really know what it is, but I saw the title Happy Sad Man and I thought, that's me. So just identifying with that name was enough for some people to come along. But yeah, I think it's important because, you know, sometimes having conversations like this can feel awkward or uncomfortable for people when they don't really know how to do it. And that's kind of why I made the film, because when we don't always get taught how to have these sort of difficult conversations. But when you watch a movie, you can kind of see it role modeled by other people. And it makes it a little bit easier to start that chat with your mates or with a loved one. So
yeah, and I think things that are said in it you can instantly relate. So my mum had bipolar disorder 1, and there was a lot of similarities between her and some of the things Grant and John described. So, you know, you instantly relate to that and you think back to those memories and stuff, and that's where you get a bit emotional. But I want to talk a bit more about John. And there's a couple of scenes which resonated with me, which is the one where John was very, very depressed, and I think you took him to the emergency ward. Yeah. I've done that many times with my mum, because there's not much of a other solution when they're manic or in psychosis or whatever. You've got to go to the emergency department, get them assessed, and then if there's a bed in the psych ward or whatever, they'll then take them across. If not, they'll come back, whatever it is. So, do you want to talk about that from your perspective in regards to how that whole scene and that event played out for you?
Yeah, sure. So to paint a picture back to that time, the editing process of cutting Happy Sad Man was very long. And so when we pretty much finished the film, locked it away, locked the cut, I got a phone call from Johnny, and I could tell from the tone of his voice that he was very, very unwell. And I've seen John, you know, experience very high highs and very low lows, but this felt like a whole nother kettle of fish. And I went and picked John up from out near Geelong, and I could just see and hear in his voice that he was really unwell. And so even though I'd seen him very unwell before, I'd never really had a time where I felt like we needed to go to hospital. But he stayed with me for a couple of days, and my dogs were actually really concerned about him. So I've got 2 dogs, and Mooch, she's never particularly liked John. I guess his energy's his vibration is a little bit intense for her, and she's older and she's quite timid, and she's always been a bit like, she'll go upstairs when John's around. But actually when John was with me at that time and very unwell, she kind of curled herself up around his neck and stayed with him and watched him and slept with him. And I could tell that John, was in a different state. So I spoke to him and I said, look, I think maybe it would be a good idea if we go to the hospital. And he nodded and said, look, I'm handing over to you now. He was saying that he's putting his life in my hands, and he trusted me. But for me, Joel, it was the first time going through this. I thought, what do I do? Where should I take him? Which is the best hospital? And I was so conscious of the fact that I'm a filmmaker making a film like this, and the universe is going, hey, here we go, you finished the film, but wait, there's more. And just seeing John like that, I put down the camera and I focused on caring for him and doing what I could to get him to the best support that I could. And so we went to the St. Vincent's Hospital, and as you see in the film, he was assessed. He spoke to nurses and doctors there, and they wanted to give John a bed, but they didn't have any beds. And even that in itself is something that I'm sure you yourself know can happen. And yeah, I think for me, we did do some filming at that time because John said, this is real life. People need to see this. And so with his consent, we did some filming at the hospital and we documented that process. And then months later, I showed John the footage and I said, look, if you don't want this footage in the film, I'll cut it out. But he said no, he gave his consent, because it is a part of the process that some people might think, you know, if you've broken a leg or if you had a heart attack, you can go to the hospital and there'll be a bed. But, you know, it's not always the case. And so for me, yeah, that was a big learning curve to realize that even though they knew he needed the care, there wasn't the space. But to their credit, they really clearly asked me, was I comfortable taking John home for the night? If I wasn't, they would have accommodated him in the emergency department, you know, on a stretcher. But I felt comfortable bringing him home. But, you know, a lot of people wouldn't have had someone who could take them home or even take them in there in the first place. So I want to acknowledge that a lot of people are battling a lot of circumstances without having that support. But they promised me that they would find him a bed the next day, and I took him back and they were able to find him a bed. And yeah, I visited him every day once he was in there, and that as well was a learning experience for me. But yeah, it was a pretty difficult time, and I'm really happy to share that John is doing really well at the moment. He's living out in a regional area, growing vegetables and heaps of fruit, and loving that daily work and that daily practice of looking after his huge garden. It's more than a garden, it's like a little farm.
I think he's fantastic. You know, I think my mum's got bipolar disorder. She's deceased, but bipolar 1. And obviously with that condition, you're probably more manic, and then you're less flat, but you're more manic. But it's a very full on, you know, if you live with someone like that all the time, you know, it could be very just full on. And I think John was a good representation of everything that comes with bipolar disorder. And it was very important to put that scene in there, I felt, because that's just the realities of it. You know, people just think you can, all right, someone's getting manic, you can call someone to come help. It doesn't happen. You've got to get a ambulance or police will come depending on what happens. Then they go in there, give them a psych assessment for 8 hours or 10 hours, whatever it is. If there is no bed, they've got to stay in the ward for 3 days and maybe get taken to the inpatient in the psychiatric ward if that's available. And that's just the reality, as you know, and that's something that can happen for people multiple times. And you went through that. So it's sort of, you get a deeper understanding of mental illness firsthand in regards to the process and what a lot of people go through with it. And in regards to you went into the psychiatric ward as well to visit him as well? Yeah. Yeah,
I was going in there pretty much every day. And, you know, John is in his 70s, but as you might have noticed in the film, he's very physically fit guy. Yeah. He's very slim. He eats really healthy food and he's very physical. So he's got a bit of muscle, a bit of bone, but like that's fatty. He doesn't have any body fat. And so when he got into the hospital, he was, you know, not well, but he was very much himself in that he wasn't unaware of the fact that he can't cook his own meals. He can't just rock up in the kitchen and take care of his
They're not going to give you a knife or anything like that.
Yeah. So, you know, the other thing that I would point out is that because of John's age, he was put into a ward that was for seniors. It was a facility that was for senior people. And he at one point sort of looked at me and said, everyone here is old. And I was like, John, and he's like, yeah, they're all old. And he kind of felt like a fish out of water, because I guess in many ways John doesn't see himself as being the age that he is. You know, he's kind of, you know, in what of a better term, a big kid at heart in lots of ways, and very physical and energetic and very independent, and he's used to doing what he wants to do when he wants to do it. So he knew he needed care and needed to be in there. But I noticed him, you know, socializing with other people, and I thought to myself, I wonder if it's permitted if I can take John for a walk. Because I thought maybe, you know, I understand they'll have regulations. And they said, oh, you can take him out. I said, even just to the car park area. So I took him out to the car park area, and there was one tree, and I was just stretching my back and hugging the tree. John was hugging the tree. And then I thought even just that little bit of moment to go outside for 20 minutes was really good for John. And then the next day I said to them, oh, is it possible to take him for a walk anywhere else? And they said, oh yeah, like we don't have enough staff to do that right now, but if you want to take him for a walk, that's fine. So I found a local park, which is about 5-10 minutes away, and walked him there. And then he did some exercises in the play equipment. We went on the swing. He was doing some chin-ups and some push-ups and just things like that seem simple. But for John, using his body is a huge part of keeping himself mentally healthy. And he's told me that before. And so I thought, well, what can I offer in this situation? If I know John really well, I know that playing music, doing physical activity, those are things that he likes. So yeah, I was really glad to be able to go in there and spend time and gain some insight into what it was like there, but also take John out and help him to feel, still himself as best as he could in that way.
No, I thought it was very, very important scene to have. And what's your overall thoughts on bipolar disorder? What is it to you? What would you describe it to someone as?
Yeah, I mean, when I met John and he told me he lives with bipolar disorder, I'd heard of it before, but I guess I hadn't known someone. Well, maybe I've met people with bipolar and not known, but because I was a student at university and I got to know John, I really learned most of what I know about bipolar through my friendship with John over the years, and seeing his high highs and his low lows, seeing how that impacted on him and his relationships and his family and friends. I mean, it's hard to sort of summarize, but there's always quite a lot going on. And for me, I guess I learned that for some people, maybe their ups and downs might be like this. But for John, his highs, when he was feeling manic, they would last for sometimes a couple of years. And then he might have gone down. And so in that time where he felt like he was slipping, he would say, I knew that was potentially going to lead to another maybe 2 years of depression, very, very significant depression. So it wasn't a matter of a week or so at a time. It was like really prolonged. And I know that everyone's experience is unique and some people would not experience bipolar in that way. But I learned a lot from John. And then in making the film and meeting Grant, who also lives with bipolar, I learned a lot about his experience and how he works out what he calls a recipe. And for him, his recipe for wellness is surfing every day, spending time with family, getting enough sleep, exercising, being around good people, and taking his medication. So he acknowledges, and as do I, that everyone's recipe is different. For some people, not working too much or making sure they get time in the garden or, spending time dancing or reading or sewing or learning a language or connecting with family. There's so many different pieces of the puzzle, but I think what I've learned making Happy Sad Man and learn about bipolar is that working out what works for you and kind of sticking with it, and also communicating that with people around you. Because I actually would love to share something that I learned in the process of making Happy Sad Man, and that was about sometimes we don't know what to do, so we don't do anything. Or if we see someone who might be going through a hard time, it's awkward. We don't want to muck up and say the wrong thing, so we don't say anything. And maybe, children who are living with a parent with a mental illness experience that because maybe their friends can't relate or they don't know quite how to navigate conversations, so they don't say anything. And sometimes that can leave people feeling really isolated if they're not able to have chats with people about their experience. So one thing I did with John when he was feeling really well was ask him, if you start feeling unwell again, John, what can I do? What's helpful? And John very clearly said to me, I'm going to want to sleep 23 hours a day, but don't let me, and don't mollycoddle me. Don't feed me soup in bed. Get me up, get me doing physical activity, get me doing housework, ironing, cleaning, fixing a fence, whatever it is, get me doing things. And so that might not suit everyone, but for John, that's definitely a part of his recipe is making sure he's active. So yeah, that was really helpful because when John was unwell, I knew, okay, he's going to want to keep sleeping, but I might take him out for a walk. And, waiting till he's really unwell to ask him what's helpful, it would have been too late then. I just don't think he would have had the capacity to describe it in the detail that he did. So that's something I definitely learned from the process. And I think we can all take a moment to sort of stop and think, okay, when I'm feeling pretty crap, what helps me and who can I communicate that with?
Well, I can relate to that 100% because with my mum was a single mum. So us kids was the reason why she got out of bed. So she had to get out of bed to maybe make us breakfast and to drive us to school. So if she didn't do that, we didn't go to school. So she had to do it. And yes, as you said, then she might go to sleep during the whole day, but then she'd get up at 3 o'clock to pick us up again. So you're right in what you said. Everyone's recipe is different. It's about finding that recipe earlier on though, to
Yeah.
hopefully put that in place before potentially anything can go wrong. But I just
Yeah.
want to talk about the family relationship. So it was interesting, the difference between Grant seems to have a really close family, which is fantastic, and a lot of support. And his father obviously had bipolar as well, so his mum's obviously understood. And that's sort of, when I talk to a lot of people who have mental illness, it sort of goes one way. You have a tight family unit where the partner supports the parent with the mental illness, or they're out of the picture really quickly. And then you have, I think with John, obviously his son was introduced into the scene, and his son seemed like a very understanding and caring person. But obviously from some things that were said, it seems that was a lot of maybe other members who didn't understand as much, and maybe sort of just didn't have him much involved. And that was very sad to see. But I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that or know that. So maybe you want to talk about that different in the dynamics between the families.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for me to speak for other people's experience and their views, but something that I've observed is the fact that it's really important for me to acknowledge as a friend, of someone like John, that I've met him as an adult when I was a young adult, and he was an adult. I didn't know him when he was younger. I didn't know him when he became a new dad. By the time he was 28, he had 4 sons. And, I really want to acknowledge that their experience as being the son of someone living with bipolar is very different from me being the friend. So I'm sure everyone listening can appreciate that, like being the child of someone struggling with significant mental illness has so many challenges. And so, yes, there might be some people who had a bigger network around them, a closer network around them, who stepped in and helped. And in lots of circumstances, there'd be people who did feel more isolated because there weren't people around. But it's also like, it would be naive of me to think, everyone should just understand and help, because a lot of the times the situations are so challenging, and we don't get a book in terms of at school how to learn how to deal with them. And that's why another reason why I made Happy Sad Man was to try and offer an insight into these situations, to start more conversations about what we can do as a community. It takes a village. I really believe that, and expecting us to do everything alone, especially as a single parent, a single mom or a single dad raising kids, it's really tough. It's tough, even when there is a partner and there isn't any significant mental health issues, there's still struggles. So I think that it's really noticeable in the film that Grant's parents and his siblings are such supportive people. And Grant talks about the fact that his mum sort of went doctor shopping with him and went around and saw heaps of people until they found one that felt like a good fit. And I think even just the logistics of driving someone around, it sounds simple, but having that support, having someone that's with you that can say, you know what, if you're not comfortable with him or her, that's all right, we can find someone else. That sounds like a small thing, but I think it was huge. And it was a good reminder that sometimes just being there, even if it's just being someone who can be a sounding board for like things like that, is super important.
And now with from your perspective, what do you think could be done more to support people with bipolar disorder? What's something that, from your perspective, as someone who's you learnt about it through in the film, what do you think would help people with that, with that mental illness specifically?
I mean, it sounds like a cliche that it takes a village thing, but I really think it does. And I think that hopefully if people have a close family that understand and have the capacity, because, there's people who can be understanding, but they just might not have the capacity to lean in and support. And I want to acknowledge that that's completely reasonable in lots of circumstances too. But if the people in your immediate family or your partner don't have that capacity, like, it can be really hard, because how do you find it? How do you find that outside of a medicalized sort of system? Like, obviously there's a professional medical support that you might have or need at certain times, but just finding people that you connect with. And for me, I've always liked being friends with people who are from a broad age demographic, social demographic, and not feeling like the only people who are my family are my blood relatives, but also, your chosen family. So, finding people who maybe have a lived experience that's similar to yours, and maybe someone older than you who's been through experiences that you've been through. Doesn't matter what is in life. I think that I benefit from that. And so, I think finding your people, and I'm not saying it's easy to do, but I think it's been hugely significant in people that I've observed who feel that they've got people who understand them and don't judge.
And I want to touch on one character. One of the people in the film was Ivan. I thought he was a very impressive individual, and you said a few things about him in the Q&A afterwards, and it was just like, you're right, like every town needs an Ivan in the film. And I think if there was 10,000 Ivans all around Australia, there'd be a hell of a lot of people, unfortunately, who choose to end their life. So how'd you come across him, and what did you see from just following him around? What was he doing in the community that was special or different in regards to helping people?
Yeah, so Ivan, he's also in his 70s. John and Ivan both have a lot of energy. They're not going to stop what they're doing anytime soon. And Ivan is a rural outreach worker. So he supports people and their mental health needs in regional communities, often farmers and farming families on the land. So he lives out there, and he understands that approaching people, in a way that perhaps is not speaking the language isn't going to work. So Ivan, as you saw in the film, goes out there, has a cup of tea, talks about the tractor, chats about the animals, and then sort of might say, how's everything going? I heard you had some financial stress this year. Or how have you been coping after the fires? How have you been coping after the floods? How's your marriage going? How are the kids? And he has a really, really efficient way of speaking to people in a way where they don't feel like they're being patronised. They don't feel like they're being pushed into, going to appointments. But he does refer them to see GPs or to see counsellors or see a marriage counsellor or financial consultant, because he can identify that a lot of people living on the land are very isolated and won't have the time or sometimes resources or capacity to reach out for help. So, yeah, I think every town needs an Ivan. And you're right, the rates of suicide, in Australia are very high. And as we know, women experience just as many mental health challenges as do people who identify as non-binary as men. But statistics show that men are more likely to attempt to end their own lives and to die from suicide. So Ivan has been very touched by that in his life and wants to do a lot to help people to feel less alone and to get very practical and pragmatic support.
Yeah, I just thought the rural outreach role was, I just think, if I'm going to fund something as a federal government and I saw that, I'd be going, geez, we need to find a lot more blokes like him. And I just think it's just such a better way to do the mental health care in those communities. It's such a more effective way. And I was just thinking, why isn't the rural outreach work? That's the first time I've ever heard of it or even knew that existed. And it's sort of something, is that something that's is there a lot of that funding for those people in the communities, or how does that sort of role work?
No, short answer, no. It's even been hard, even though Ivan is clearly very, very good at it. It's even been hard for him to be able to find enough funding to do it. And it's like quite heartbreaking to know. I mean, I often think about the weird things, especially when you look on the internet, Instagram, like you think about the weird things people are paid to do or things they're paid to promote. And you think, wow, isn't it amazing to think that there's people who are out there, not just changing, but potentially saving lives, who aren't able to find, adequate funding, to support them to do that. It's something I hope changes in the future. But yeah, it's definitely been a disappointing part of the journey, realizing how few people there are out there able to do this sort of work and be paid for it.
Yeah, well, I thought it was just, when I saw that role, I was thinking, geez, that makes such more common sense, this community care. Everyone wants to talk about hospitals, or they're throwing, we're going to allocate $2 billion to more mental health, to training more psychs or whatever. But these things like Ivan, like if you get a heap of them, and I don't know how much funding it would require, but you just think, geez, what a far better use of money in mental health space or other things to those sort of people. It just blew my mind to not think that was something that's in every community.
Yeah, and also like looking at it, as you said, community care, that's like a great way of putting it, because it's like, well, that's what every community needs, not just some of them, but also thinking about it in a preventative way, not waiting till someone's feeling 10 out of 10, challenged, but starting a lot earlier and realizing, okay, I'm at about 5 out of 10, I'm not feeling great, I might have a chat with Ivan, think about what I might be able to do, or who's that guy I met at the men's shed a couple of years ago? He seemed all right, maybe contact him. Because a lot of people wouldn't necessarily go, oh, I better go to hospital right now. But, getting in there a lot earlier and having that care in the community itself, yeah, of course, as you said, it's like, it seems like a no-brainer. That's where resources should be going.
Well, to me, when I saw it, I just got, because I've spoken to a few people who have community care organizations regarding people with mental illness, and especially with people with bipolar and stuff. Like it's either they're good and they're out of hospital, and then they go have a psychosis, or they go manic, and then there's emergency services called, then they're in. But there's a period of deterioration for like 4 or 3 weeks, right? Whereas they're getting on well and you can't do much about it. But having someone, like a caseworker every 2 weeks, or social worker, or like an Ivan or someone like that every 2 weeks who knew, and there could actually be some tangible help provided. I just think it's far, like you could prevent a lot of issues. I would say, just having that support on the ground.
Yeah, I agree.
So from your perspective with Ivan, there's one scene in there with the old gentleman, and I just think if you showed that to some people, at some bureaucrats at federal level or state level, and said, this is the type of people we want to help, like, geez, I just don't see why that's not I keep repeating on this point, but it's something which to me just makes a whole lot of sense to try and fund more Ivans in these communities.
Yeah, that's why I'm really dedicated to working to make sure the film reaches more people, including decision makers. But also, like, we've had a number of screenings where parents come up to me and they've attended the screening, together without their children. And, I remember having one couple who came up and said to me, thank you for making the film. And I said, oh, you're welcome. And they said, we've got a daughter who we've always just thought is lazy. We've always thought she needs to get up, get a job, get moving. She just has a bad attitude. But we've realized after just watching this film, she's struggling. She's not well. Like we need to frame our mindset and realize that, she needs support. She doesn't need us to be thinking she's lazy, because this is not a choice that she's making. And I just thought, that was really powerful. And I'm really glad when audiences share their feedback. And we also had someone once said to me at a screening, he stood up and said, I've always thought my dad is really annoying and really embarrassing, and he's too much, and he's manic. And as a teenager, I was like, Dad, can you just shut up? But after watching the film and seeing your friendship with Johnny, it's made me realize I would like to get to know my dad now that I'm an adult and see him in a different light as a friend, and try to spend some time with him and get to know him. And I realize I totally understand that this is complicated for a lot of people. And I'm not saying that everyone should be feeling like that guy did, but it was an interesting moment to sort of reflect on the fact, as I said, that John wasn't my dad. Funnily enough, John was born on the same date as my dad, but very different people. But I just want to acknowledge, for anyone listening, that I'm not trying to minimize the impact that a complicated relationship with the parent can have, and say that we should all just, turn around and try and transform these relationships overnight. But I'm glad to hear that the film is reminding people to have compassion, not only for other people, but also for themselves.
But I think it's a good mind. I think it can be that thing that flips that switch. Because when I was watching it, I was thinking, my mum's unfortunately deceased now, but I was watching it going, geez, I should have been a better son. I should have had more empathy. Like it just flipped that switch in you. And I reckon if you've got a parent with bipolar, for example, if watching something like that would definitely help you flip the switch and go, geez, I need to change my approach here, especially if you're younger. Because that's what I sort of thought. I went back and geez, I needed to be a better son. And as you said, try and be more of a friend. Or obviously because you're a friend of Johnny, and that comment from that person who said that to you, that's a similar sort of thing I would have felt. You're living in that situation all the time, and you're exposed to it, and you're just going, geez, this is embarrassing and all that sort of stuff. But as you get older, you sort of realize, well, they can't help it. And, you sort of think, well, I wish I had that help, or wish I had that sort of foresight at a younger age to sort of go off the flow a bit more and just accept them for who they are. And I think your film, for example, like it's great that Satellite showed it, because there would have been a lot of young people there who could do something about it, where they can change their actual behavior towards their parent on the basis of your film. That's why I think it's really important to get this thing in front of decision makers and in front of more people who are allocating the funding. Because I just think from watching that, there'll be people there who see it and go, geez, you might not know of a parent with a mental illness or whatever, and maybe we're going to start allocating funding towards, places like Satellite more and these other places. But it was really impactful that you said that, because that's where my mind went, and I'm sure a lot of other people did who watched it.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you for sharing that. Like it's hard in lots of ways. It's hard for me to hear you saying that, because I'm a very empathetic person. I wouldn't want anyone watching the film and feeling like they should have been different or done something different, and for that to be a hard emotion to feel. And I'm sure that yeah, I don't know. It's a complicated
No,
thing.
yeah, no, I'm just being honest. That's how I felt, and that's how I felt
Yeah.
watching it, and that's something I'm sure other people, because that's when you said that about that person, that's sort of a similar thing I could relate to, and I'm sure if someone had a parent or a family member with a mental health challenge, they probably might be thinking the same thing too, because when you're living in it all the time with that person, it can be very extremely frustrating. There can be a lot of anger and a lot of resentment towards the person, but it's more towards the mental illness. But when you watch a film like yours, you sort of have that, you can watch it from someone else's perspective, and you'd have to be completely heartless or sociopath to not feel anything and to not sort of reflect on your own behavior and sort of go, geez, I need to be a better person moving forward, and hopefully act differently in regards to other people with conditions like this.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. That's it's a good reminder to me as well. Like I said, I really value the feedback, because it's a good reminder to me that I want to work to make sure that more young people who are living with a parent with a mental illness can see the film, and to feel part of a community where we can have conversations like this, even though sometimes they're uncomfortable. They're so important, and give us an opportunity to grow and hopefully find more support for ourselves and our loved ones too.
So how do you get this in front of more decision makers? What do you have to do? What do people need to do to get this in front of more decision makers?
Yeah, well, anyone who's listening who might be interested, who might be part of a community group or a workplace or a school or an individual who wants to see the film, they can check out the website and get in touch with us. We've got a screening request form where they can also see where the film's screening at the moment. So we've got a number of screenings coming up, and we always add new ones to our website. But we also do some virtual events, so people can watch the film at home. It doesn't matter where they are, they can tune in and watch it and then engage in a Q&A at the end with us. So similar to what you came to a live event in Melbourne, we do them online so people can attend and share it with people that they might want to watch the film with. So the best place is to look at happysadman.org. That's our website, happysadman.org, and feel free to get in touch or follow us on social media. It's just at Happy Sad Film. And the reason why it's not at Happy Sad Man is because at Happy Sad Man was taken by some guy who has pictures of like 5 cats from 10 years ago. So,
okay, right.
So at Happy Sad Film is where we are on socials.
Now I've just got a couple more questions. I sort of tried to wrap it up. I didn't want to wrap it up early. We'll probably led that question too early. But I'm just going to ask you from your perspective as well. Obviously, mental health awareness is a big thing now, and it's just sort of everyone knows it's an issue, but it seems to just focus on 2 things, which is anxiety and depression. If you said to the layperson, what's bipolar, schizophrenia, BPD, young carers, they probably wouldn't think of it in the same thing. So from your perspective, what could be done to start shifting the conversation to get, because I'll give you an example, like Satellite, for example, only received funding, I think a large amount of funding last year after Rose has been doing it for like 10, 11 years. There's another organization called Little Dreamers, same thing, after 10, 11 years of doing it pretty much on a shoestring, they finally got acknowledged in the Royal Commission Victoria and then got some money allocated towards them. Which for me, hopefully it's great, but it should be more because it's such a important organization. So where do you think from your perspective that just looking at it as a normal person, it needs to go, or where does it need to go? What needs to happen next?
Did you just call me a normal person?
I shouldn't have called you a normal. Sorry.
Biggest insult. No, I'm joking.
No.
Someone
I meant as a let's say someone, like obviously you're living in it now because you've made a film which is focused on that subject. And I don't know too much personally about yourself if you might have mental health challenges or anything. I just mean, but like as a
I was just joking. I'm a joker, and I had someone once come up to me at a screening, and he was 11, and he said, "Oh, it's so cool to think that like a normal person can make a movie." And I said, "Are you calling me normal?" Just my little joke. What is normal? And I probably wouldn't.
True. What is normal? Exactly.
Exactly. Sorry, I was digressing. Semantics, but I think in terms of what needs, what was the question, Joel?
It's all good. So from like obviously, it's in general now. I ask this to a lot of people. There's mental health awareness movement, which everyone knows about. Mental health is an issue, but if you look at, let's say, the rates of people choosing their life, it's decreasing a little bit, but it's not decreasing at the level it should be. And mental health, unfortunately, seems to be monopolized by a couple of big brands, and those big brands just focus on depression and anxiety. There's no focus on schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, young carers, families who are affected by it. So from your perspective, what can be done to shift, or where does it need to go from here to make things better?
I mean, one thing I want to acknowledge is that being part of a film like this, like not everyone would want to do that or is interested. And I totally get that. So I just want to acknowledge that the guys have been so trusting and courageous to share their stories on screen. And for me, like, I always think it comes down to, like, as an individual, what can I do? How can I empower myself to feel like I'm making a difference? And for me, it was making this film, because in an hour and a half, there's a lot going on in Happy Sad Man. I always think, gosh, there's a lot going on. In an hour and a half, you can potentially do so many things: encourage empathy, encourage action, encourage connection, help people feel less isolated, encourage people to take action locally or within their own home or their school, all these different things it can do. So for me, it's like, I acknowledge, as you said, that a lot of people have a better understanding now what depression is or what anxiety is, but there's different, mental health conditions on the spectrum that they might not know anything about BPD, or they might not know what bipolar is. And often the way we learn about these things is through cinema and TV. And sometimes, as you would know, over the years, the representations of mental illness in the media can be very misleading, very stereotypical, and sometimes very damaging. So for me, it's about how can we give people an insight that's really authentic, but also is responsible. And so I think we shouldn't put the onus on people with lived experience to have to keep talking, because some people just don't want to, and I totally respect that. But for those who are comfortable to talk about it and are doing that, like, listen to them, but also amplify their voices and get those stories out there. So for me, on a personal level, that's making this film, making sure people can see it, starting conversations, extending conversations. But I think the younger generation, to be honest, like lots of different conditions, whether it's physical, mental, they're learning about it online. They're reading about it on social media. They're looking at an Instagram post. They're watching a video like this or listening to a podcast like this, and it's raising awareness. So I feel quite confident as an optimist, stoic optimist, that the next generation of kids, like, talking about how you're feeling there's not going to be any stigma around that in the same way that John's generation at school, maybe there was. So I think over time things are getting better. And there's things that we can all do as individuals just to be mindful of the language we use. In many ways, when I hear people say stuff like man up, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, man up, and also, it's very gendered language that people will sometimes use that I think can be really damaging. But also language around mental illness can be really damaging as well. Like, that was totally insane. Oh my gosh, that's so psycho. Oh my gosh, I've totally got OCD because I, want to clean my desk. But just kind of not really understanding how that language can be really misused. That's another thing that I feel very passionate about, the language that we use and how we use it.
Yeah, a lot of people say that it's commonly like, he's a nutcase or she's a nutcase or something like that, and it is very, if you know someone who's got a mental illness, it can be very, as soon as you hear that, it makes you sort of get a bit worked up in a bit, doesn't it? So some great points there. So what are you working on next then? What's your next project?
Yeah, I've actually just started a brand new project, which is really exciting, with Lifeline Australia. Yep. So they're celebrating their 60th anniversary next year. And I'm just starting to make a documentary with them, and we'll be sort of looking at exploring and getting insights into their history, but also in present day, the crisis support workers that are picking up the phones and answering calls and responding to people who need a hand. It's something that I'm really interested in as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Sounds good. So thank you very much. I'll leave it there for today. I think I've taken more than enough of your time, and thank you very much for accommodating me, and very privileged to have you on. And it's just a fantastic thing you've been doing and done. I think it's, as you said, the way you've been able to make an impact in the mental health space is far greater than a lot of other people who I think, and obviously a lot of people do great work in it, but I think it's just been a fantastic avenue, and it's such a good way. And I think it's a really impactful way to get this message out there. And I just hope more people watch this film and have the opportunity to see it, and especially decision makers. If you get a bureaucrat sitting in this, I'm sure, I tell you what, they'd have to be a pretty heartless person to not want to go into, and start allocating more money towards different services and organizations that are out there.
Well, thank you, Joel. Thank you for saying that. And also, I just want to acknowledge the amount of effort and love that you put into producing this podcast and sharing stories that otherwise some people might not be hearing. So thank you for being so honest and dedicated to making a difference in this space as well.
I need to do more, but thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.